are now listening to Radio Merdog.
What up? Welcome back to Radio Merdog, the show that discusses only the sickest topics on the planet. Today we'll be taking a look at a personal favorite cryptid of mine, one that I think has very reasonable plausibility for existence. So, for a moment, just imagine this scene. Alright, it's midnight, you're deep in Florida, you're deep in the Everglades, it's hot, muggy, you hear the droning sounds of cicadas buzzing and mosquitoes swarming, and suddenly you get hit with this wave of rotten egg stench. Hits you so hard that you start to choke and your eyes are watering, your nose running. You shine up your flashlight and you see the outline of this massive, hair-covered being standing at the tree line just staring at you, staring you down. And then it begins to cry out, letting out just this awful-sounding scream. And that's when you know you've just encountered a real-life skunk ape in the wild. So, before we get into what a skunk ape is, I'd like to thank Strong Coffee Company for working with Radio Merdog. If your mornings or your workdays demand more than ordinary coffee, Strong Coffee Company is the solution. They're the best. Their premium instant coffee mixes and combines organic coffee with grass-fed collagen, MCT oil, adaptogens, and various nootropics, including lion's mane, which is just some... Lion's mane is so sick, and it gives you this nice, clean, sustained energy and mental focus without the crash or jitters of typical coffee. And I personally love their vanilla instant latte with collagen because it gets me 15 grams of protein per serving, which just helps me hit my macros every day to, get huge, stay swole, because, what else makes sense in this world but to get huge and jacked? It mixes easily in hot or iced water, making it perfect whether you're heading to work, hitting the gym, or just powering through a long day. And right now, listeners of Radio Merdog can get 20% off your order with code MERDOG at strongcoffeecompany.com. That's code MERDOG. So make sure to upgrade your coffee routine and start your day strong. So, what the hell is a skunk ape? The simplest explanation that I have for you is that it's Florida's version of Bigfoot. Not just Florida, also Alabama, Georgia, a couple other southern states, but primarily Florida. But there's a lot more to it than that. Most reports of the skunk ape come from in the Everglades areas, in the big cypress swamps, and there's also some in southern Florida. There's a couple near the Keys, actually. But the main thing that sets it apart from the standard Sasquatch variety, other than its name, is it's the location, the fact that it's in the deep south, and its unique scent. So most of the standard Sasquatch varieties, they live in the cooler, more temperate climates in the Pacific Northwest and surrounding areas, Northern California, whereas the skunk ape has adapted to warmer climates, and nearly all reports of the Florida skunk ape are accompanied by the fact that it just has this abhorrent stench. It's usually described as smelling like sulfur, like this powerful sulfuric stink, kind of like that of a rotten egg mixed with skunk spray, and it just really is something awful and makes it stand out a lot. So people usually report smelling the creature before actually seeing it, which is pretty interesting. It's usually described as being about 6 to 7-ish feet tall, so a little bit smaller than some of the other Sasquatch varieties in the US and the Yeti in the Himalayas or Yowie in Australia. And it's also usually reported to have a lighter coat than others, both in color and thickness, which is most likely some sort of adaptation to the tropical climate and swamp life. It usually has a more reddish coat as well instead of brown. It has notably long and incredibly strong arms. There's some fantastic footage that we'll talk about later on that comes from the Lettuce Lake Swamp in central Florida, and it shows this large skunk ape hitting the water, and just it's pretty fascinating, but it's doing stuff that no human would be ever able to do, or bear, or anything else like that. It's also generally described as moving extremely quickly, even through the water, at a pace that no large mammal should be able to go through. And the places and ways that it is able to maneuver are things that us humans would never be able to do. Yet, there's footage of these creatures doing just that. And most sightings of the skunk ape also do occur at night, or at least around dusk time, so that generally suggests that they live a crepuscular lifestyle, coming out during the twilight hours and during the late evening time. And if we go back into earlier history, the native tribes in the region, mainly the Seminoles and the Makusakis, they have had a lot of stories of hairy giants in the area long before any of these modern day sightings. And their culture specifically features tales and stories of a foul-smelling and very physically powerful and secretive creature called the Esti Kapkaki, which that name roughly translates to furry tall man or hairy giant. So from this one sighting in 1818, the local newspapers reported a story from what is now Apalachicola, Florida, and the stories were of this man-sized monkey raiding food stores and stalking fishermen along the shore, which is terrifying. I mean, I think there's a big issue with monkey-like people robbing stores in Florida, but, you know, that's at gunpoint versus just the monkey man raiding stores, so I don't know. Pretty interesting. I don't know if they had bath salts around as much back in 1818, but I'm sure they had some good stuff to get geeked up on. In 1929, there's another pretty famous sighting that happened after they had constructed this tower called the Perky Bat Tower in the Florida Keys, and the witnesses of this creature reported this unknown ape-like thing. It basically went to the construction site, inspected the tower, so it was just looking at it, and the tower had recently been stocked with bats, and so the creature, he shook the tower, which freaked the bats out, and they all flew off, and then the creature went back into the woods. So I don't know what its motive was, because that's a pretty strange thing to be doing. If he was trying to release the bats or what's up with that, but I thought it was an interesting case. Then, a little later on, in 1942, in Suwannee County in northern Florida, a man reported a pretty similar ape-like creature to the Perky Bat Tower incident, rushing out from the brush line while he was driving down an isolated road. And this creature reportedly grabbed onto his vehicle and beat down on the running board and door for a little over a half mile before it ran off into the woods. And somewhat nearby, in Putnam County, starting in the 1940s, there were numerous sightings of a creature, mainly in the town of Barden. And so they started calling it the Barden Booger. So I started seeing this monkey creature and started calling it the Booger. So thought that was worth noting because it was kind of funny. But sightings, they really increased in the 50s, 60s, and 70s because there was this big mass exodus of populations moving into, meaning human populations, moving into the swamps in Florida because the coasts were getting more and more populated. So in the 60s, a pretty massive swath of sightings started to crop up in Alachua County and Marion County, which these are in central Florida, by the way. And this one specific report from 1963, it involved several family members who encountered an ape-like creature around their rural home for a couple weeks. And they reported that on several occasions, it would come up to the house and peer inside at night for extended periods of time, watching them inside, which is definitely one of my biggest fears, to look outside and see some kind of unknown hominid looking inside. That's been a big fear of mine for a long time, so it sucks that these people went through that. So, I do want to touch on this thing that started in 1955 called the BFRO, or the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. And they've been cataloging and archiving hundreds of sightings across nearly every county in Florida and every state, actually also Canada, and it's a still ongoing project. So I just checked their database today, just now, and there are 346 confirmed listings in their database for Florida, and the most recent sighting was actually a Class A sighting from Levy County, where a couple had a daylight sighting, which is big news, something relatively uncommon, and basically two Bigfoots crossed the road in the Goeth State Forest, 25 miles west of Ocala. And just to clarify, the BFRO, they use a 3-class system to determine the legitimacy of reports on Bigfoot Bigfoots or skunk apes. So Class A reports involve clear sightings in circumstances where misinterpretation or misidentification of other animals can be totally ruled out with great confidence. So, for example, several footprints that are very well documented, these would be considered Class A reports, because misidentification of common animals can be confidently ruled out. Therefore, the potential for misidentification is extremely low. Class B incidents are where a possible Sasquatch-like creature was observed, usually at a great distance or in poor lighting conditions. And incidents in any other circumstance that did not afford a very clear view of the subject, these are considered Class B reports. So, for example, credible reports where nothing was seen, but distinct and characteristic sounds of Sasquatches were heard, are always considered Class B reports and never Class A. Even in the most compelling sound-only cases, this is because the lack of a visual element raises a substantially greater potential for misidentification of the sounds. There are a lot of really cool Bigfoot sounds out there. I recommend you look up the Sierra sounds. It's pretty spooky. There's some really, probably shouldn't let it get to me so much, but a lot of this Bigfoot stuff does strike a chord with me. I think it's because of how close we are to them, just from a physiological point of view. And I'll get into some interspecies mixing a little later on and the potential of that, and that might cause a sort of uncanny valley. So I think it is interesting, but I do still recommend you look them up. And Class B reports, they really aren't considered any less credible or less important than the Class A reports. They're both deemed credible enough by the BFRO to show to the public. So, for example, one of the best documented reports ever was a Class B report from Trinity County, California, which involved a very credible witness who backpacked into a remote area that has a long history of Sasquatch-related incidents, and he described various occurrences around his camp at night, which are strongly suspected to be Sasquatch-related. And this report is still, however, considered to be a Class B, though, because there was no clear visual observation to confirm what was actually heard outside the tent. And almost all reports included in the BFRO database are first-hand reports. Occasionally, a second-hand report will be considered reliable enough to add to the database, but those reports are never considered Class A because, there's just always a higher potential for inaccuracy when the story doesn't come straight from the source, straight from the eyewitness. And then there's Class C, which mainly just comprises of second-hand reports and even third-hand reports or stories with untraceable sources. So I just thought I'd let you know. I highly encourage you to check out bfro.net to learn more about all of these specific sightings and reports all over North America. If you're in the U.S., I almost guarantee there's been some within your county, if not within 50, 100 miles of you. They are all over. It's pretty wild. And yeah, the BFRO is really a fantastic resource for learning about all these Sasquatches around us. So, back to the skunk ape, there were some more famous sightings that happened in the 70s. Well, here's one that was in Palm Beach. There was two sheriff deputies, one named Ernie Milner and one named Marvin Lewis, and they both reported that they were stalked by an ape-like creature through a whole entire grove. Before they shot it, they opened fire on it with their pistols on the creature, and then they claimed to follow a trail of bloody footprints where they recovered some of its hair that got snagged on a barbed wire fence that it pushed down when escaping them. And it's unfortunately, from the articles I could find on this incident, I couldn't find any evidence that any DNA testing was done on this fur, which is just a total shame because that could have been major proof for the existence of some kind of non-human hominid. But between 1971 and 1975, there was a whole slew of sightings throughout Broward County, where many eyewitnesses reported encounters, mainly at night, with a 6 to 7 foot tall ape creature with dark red fur. And these sightings were covered heavily in all of the newspapers, both locally and in greater Florida cities, even reaching places like Miami. And it was during this time, between 71 and 75, that the term skunk ape entered the common lexicon in Florida initially, but then news spread throughout the world. And some of these reports claimed that the skunk ape was up to some pretty sinister business. I mean, this guy, he was invading homes, stalking people, killing farmers' livestock, even things like horses and bulls, not just the usual sheep and goats that are usually hurt during cryptid encounters. And it does stick out to me in a weird way how prevalent it is in cryptid sightings that farmers' livestock gets injured in one way or another. But regardless, the local police in Broward County investigated all of these disturbances, especially after one law enforcement officer reported to have hit the skunk ape with his car. And after all of this happened, the couple mobs formed up and they were trying to hunt down the beast, but no body nor evidence was ever found, unfortunately. And within Florida, tourism in the Everglades is a massive industry and has been for many decades. And there have certainly been a number of sightings during these tours, whether it be via bus, boat, or something else. So one example, in July 1997, a bus driver named David Shealy reported wildlife bait stands that were filled with lima beans. He reported that they had been raided and noticed these strange tracks surrounding them, these large, almost human-like tracks, but not fully human. So he started to bait the other locations in the area with more and more lima beans. And after that, multiple witnesses came forward reporting skunk ape sightings shortly thereafter. And so Shealy's theory for what was happening was that due to higher than usual seasonal flooding, the skunk apes were driven into tighter, smaller ranges at higher ground and were using these food storages with lima beans for some sustenance along the way. So another sighting by two bus tour operators occurred, well, it's worth noting this occurred during weather well over 100 degrees with an exceptional high humidity during the summer, and this was in a very rural spot in the Everglades, far away from anybody else. And several of their guests also reported these sightings. So they claimed that due to the extenuating factors of the weather and the location, that a hoax was very unlikely, and I am definitely inclined to agree with them. It's a ridiculous notion that someone would go out of their way in a mega rural swamp land, far away from any other people, in a thick, hot, hairy suit in the water, surrounded by alligators, cottonmouths, giant Burmese pythons, in, once again, well over 100-degree weather, just to play a prank. And it doesn't sit right with me. Before we get into some of the best skunk ape evidence that I've ever been able to find, I do want to give a brief word from Aspire Energy Drinks. So, do you ever need a boost that keeps you sharp and ready for anything? You should try an Aspire Energy Drink. With a clean, focused energy blend, you'll power through your day without the crash. And here's the best part. Go to aspiredrinks.com and use code Merdog at checkout to get 20% off your order. That's Aspire Energy Drinks at aspiredrinks.com. Use code Merdog, get 20% off, get geeked up, have fun, and keep that energy up with you. So, looking at some of the best evidence, in my opinion, comes from the year 2000. And if you know anything about skunk apes, you've probably seen these photos. They are the Myakka skunk ape photos. And I do really need to start making this a video show at some point. But for now, I ask you right now, just Google Myakka skunk ape photos so you can see what I'm talking about. So these photos were received by the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, anonymously, I might add, and they depict a large, hairy, ape-like creature. And this letter was on the back. It was an anonymous letter, and it said this: "Enclosed, please find some pictures I took. My husband thinks it is an orangutan. Is someone missing an orangutan? It is in a crouching position in the middle of standing up from where it was sitting. It froze as soon as the flash went off. I heard the orangutan walk off into the bushes. I judged it as being about 6.5 to 7 feet tall. As soon as I realized how close it was, I got back to the house. It had an awful smell that lasted well after it had left my yard. The orangutan was making deep, quote, whoomp, unquote, noises. For 2 nights prior, it had been taking apples that my daughter brought down from up north off our back porch. It only came back one more night after that and took some apples that my husband left out in order to get a better look at it. We got a dog back there now, and as far as I can tell, it hasn't been back. I don't want any fuss or people with guns traipsing around behind our house. At the very least, this animal belongs in a place like Busch Gardens. Why haven't people been told that an animal this size is loose? Please look after the situation. I don't want my backyard to turn into someone else's circus. So, after these photos came out, the renowned cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman, who's one of the most foremost experts in the field, had the photographs analyzed and noted that the creature captured on film had some pretty structural similarities to that of orangutan, although he did not believe it was one because there were enough differences to have it be identifiable as a different creature. I think that one very important thing to note about these photos that I at least have never read or heard anyone else mentioning is that of the saw palmetto leaves that are partially obscuring its mouth in both photos. So these saw palmettos, as their name suggests, have sharp serrated edges and sharp ends that can easily break the skin of an average person. They are super sharp. And the leaves, they might just look like soft blades of grass, but they are actually pretty darn rigid. The stems or stalks just below the leaves are quite painful if you were to bump into one. And people oftentimes will just plant them to serve as a deterrent against unwanted animals or would-be burglars. And the reason I mention this is because it seems to me, at least, in the photo that this beast is eating some of the leaves. And notice if you look at the photos how they are detached from the main plant. They are bent at the ends, crumpled up, and they look like they're wet compared to the others, as if the thing in the photo was in the process of chewing them up. And notice how they seem to be at least partially in the mouth in both photos. And I'm not an expert in costumes. I've done a lot of research, but certainly no expert. But I've never seen anyone wearing a mask, as some people say the skunk ape might be wearing, meaning if it's a hoax and a person wearing a mask. Being able to chew on anything, let alone leaves like these in a mask, makes no sense. And again, they seem to be wet, which would be consistent with something being chewed up by a living animal, not a costume. So I can say pretty confidently that this is a real living mammal of some sort. And one interesting thing that I've been looking into lately, I've been to studies by a lady named Melba Ketchum, who's a veterinarian who also does scientific research. And she did genetic testing on multiple alleged Bigfoot hair samples sent to her by various people. And the results showed genetic profiles that all share mitochondrial human DNA, as well as unknown primate DNA. Is insane. And this, in a way, implies that these Bigfoot populations were hybrids between human females and an unknown species. And she has submitted her research for publication, but it was denied. And she claims that no one would do so on the grounds that such creatures do not exist. Therefore, they weren't even going to entertain the possibility of her claims being true. And yeah, this sounds like another version of, oh, I have the truth and they don't want you to know. Though, she has her own journal of veterinary sciences, and in her journal, she's previously published research she's done and published, so she just published the data in that. And she's had other researchers validate her methods and findings, and they concluded that her results were correct. And she's working on having other researchers replicate her findings. And I would say that I'm honestly inclined to believe her and the work she's doing. And this all kind of leads me down to a couple different theories that I personally have. And one is that not every human species died out. You're not the only human species on the planet alive. Like, for example, let's take a look at Homo floresiensis, aka what we now know as the orang pendek found in Sumatra, or potentially the Ibu gogo found on the island of Flores in Indonesia. And it's hard to not see the similarities between the Ibu gogo from Flores Island folklore and the Homo floresiensis. The Ibu gogo is described as a small, hairy, human-like creature who are said to have lived in the central part of Flores until recently. And either it's a weird coincidence or maybe the Ibu gogo was actually real. and we're just a different name for Homo floresiensis. And I'll be going more into floresiensis in the future because there's a lot to it. I mean, everything surrounding the orang pendek especially is fascinating. Just to give you a brief overview, they call them the Hobbit people. They were these 3 to 4 foot tall humans that may still exist in Indonesia to this day. And I mean, really, there's 16 different Homo species, and I don't think it's too far out of the realm of possibility that other human species are still around and may have interbred with Homo sapiens to create these hybrids, and that might be what Bigfoot are, or what these other hominids are that live among us. And let's also take a look at the Gigantopithecus blacki, which was, or is, a 10-foot tall ape that lived in Asia, mainly of what is now modern-day China, and is thought to have gone extinct somewhere around 100,000 years ago, according to mainstream science. I do think, however, there is a pretty distinct possibility that they could have crossed over to the United States from China through the Bering Strait before the sea levels rose, which also explains why they would have settled down in the Pacific Northwest initially and have a greater population in that area and know the land better, because these are very intelligent beings. And I also think it's possible then that these Gigantopithecus may have interbred with some of the other Homo species, whether that's Homo sapiens or something else, and yeah, that could have led to the Sasquatch species that we have today. So that's just some pure stream of consciousness on some theories I have, and I'll touch more. I mean, I have some big heavy hitters I'm going to be talking to about Bigfoot in the near future, so look forward to that. That'll be pretty legit. So let's get back to the skunk ape for a bit longer. One thing that I've wondered for years but never really looked into it until recently was why the skunk ape is known for having such an awful stench. And then I thought critically for a minute, and I realized it's probably just due to the fact that it lives in tepid, waterlogged swamps, which is basically just giving it a wet dog effect, but amplified like 1,000 times. I also read that it's thought to roll in decaying vegetation to camouflage its scent, which is kind of similar to how gorillas use scent for their territory. And really, if you think about it, Florida is just the perfect place for a cryptid to live. There are millions of acres of relatively unexplored wetland, dense foliage, little to no light pollution, and plenty of stuff to eat, from all manner of different tropical vegetation to small and large mammals, snakes, lizards, etc. There's so much stuff out there. And there is, of course, a large number of people who think it's all a hoax and that there's no real skunk ape, and this is the case with most cryptids. There's always going to be some haters, and I get it. Some people just don't want to expand their consciousness and question the reality around them and want to live in their boring little bubbles, and that's okay. So I'll entertain these people for a bit and look at some possible debunking factors. So for one, there is the classic bear example. Black bears do live in Florida, in the swamps, and particularly the Everglades, and they do occasionally stand on their hind legs and can have a pretty human-like appearance, but some of the behaviors described and even captured on footage do not match up with black bears, like their ability to rip off big chunks of bark from trees, and just the general movement, especially in some of this footage, does not match up with bears. So I'm going to put a link in the description to a video that I highly encourage you to watch, and it's called the Lettuce Lake footage, and it's pretty cool. I've actually been through Lettuce Lake before. There's this cool wooden boardwalk that you can walk on that sort of snakes through the swampy lake, and dude, there's no way a human or bear could do what this creature is doing in the video. If you've been to Lettuce Lake, or really any kind of swampy, mucky place like this, you would know it would be absolutely insane for someone to go in the water and do that sort of thing. Being knee-deep in water in a cypress swamp is a ridiculous thing for somebody to do. And there's really no other animal that could explain skunk apes and their existence other than, I guess, theoretically escaped pet primates, which I think, given the extent of skunk ape sightings over the years and their long history in, native Floridian history, it's really not consistent with the relatively small amount of captive primate keeping happening in Florida. And people, it's that, and then people letting them loose into the wild. It just doesn't add up. So we're left with these things like the Lettuce Lake footage and the Mayaka photos, and either these were hoaxed or they weren't. And if they weren't hoaxed, well, the things in these photos and these videos, they certainly are not human or bears. So what are we left with then? Personally, I I think skunk apes, basically subspecies of Bigfoot. I do genuinely believe in that. And please click that link and check out the Lettuce Lake footage. The one I'll put in there is the stabilized version that really clearly shows the skunk ape flapping around in the water. It grabs out a fish. It looks at the camera briefly at the 27-second mark. It's incredible. So I hope you learned a little bit about skunk apes today. Maybe set your mind flowing, got the juices going. And thank you for listening to Radio Merdog. And if you feel like it, please follow and leave a review if you like this episode. And I'm just here to remind you that you're nobody till somebody loves you. And that somebody is me. I love you. Thanks again for listening. Peace.